Instant retaliation by the armed forces of Ukraine for Oreshnik. The strikes of retribution burned Russia to the ground. You have to see this. They leveled the Russians to the ground. A fierce sweep live on air. The deadly power of our forces is pushing the enemy right back to the borders. Ukrainian defenders rushed in without fear. 400 square kilometers have been cleared. Our troops are entering Crimea through the land corridor. By tomorrow, the armed forces of Ukraine will be in Yalta. Total shock. Putin was not prepared for this. He's afraid of his own shadow, and his body doubles can't save him. Moscow is nervous. The dictator hasn't been seen in the bunker. And on top of that, Lukashenko has had an unexpected revelation. An urgent appeal to Zelensky and a request to meet. The West hinted this meeting could be the last one of Lukashenko's life. You won't believe what's happening. The Black Sea has turned into a trap for the enemy. An oil-fueled apocalypse has crept up to the so-called enemy security zone. The tourist season has been ruined. The Kremlin is preparing to renounce territories. All this and more in our episode Hellpoint. It happened. Russian generals suddenly saw darkness before their eyes. The Ukrainian armed forces took advantage of the occupiers' mistake and reclaimed 400 square kilometers of territory. A triumph that the whole world is openly talking about. Our forces pushed the enemy back to the borders in the Kharkiv region and near Zaporizhia. They laid the dictator's soldiers in a mass grave. Footage of the confrontation of the year is already online. Drones struck the match of revenge and threw it into the heart of the Russian army. An explosion of unprecedented scale. Syrsky announced, has the retreat really begun? Don't miss it.
A turning point on the front in Ukraine. Today it's the main topic in most Western publications. Yes, over the past few months, more than 400 square kilometers of territory have returned to Ukrainian control, writes Bloomberg. This is partly due to the occupiers losing access to Starlink satellite communications, which has impacted both the enemy's communications and their ability to use drones. Meanwhile, Ukraine is only increasing its drone strikes.
The Cornet has become a nightmare on the wings of the night, in part thanks to that machine vision, which not only provides guidance in the final stage, but also, as you can see, generally identifies targets, thanks to the function of those very objects that, in principle, need to be hit. In other words, this significantly simplifies the task for the Ukrainian operator.
Where just yesterday personnel, weapons and fuel for the occupiers were openly transported, today these are roads of death. About this, Russian long-haul drivers do not.
I am honestly feeling completely exhausted and incredibly tired of the endless cycle of recording these videos over and over again. The constant pressure to perform, the repetitive nature of setting up the camera, and the grueling process of capturing the perfect take have finally started to take a significant toll on my energy levels. It feels like a never-ending loop of talking to a lens, and I am just truly worn out by the whole production process at this point. Now, stopping for an hour to sleep can cost you dearly. And
the lack of timely supplies directly affects the front line. For example, recently the defense forces launched another small counter-offensive in Zaporizhia and cleared Stepnohursk. Today, enemy firing positions are being eliminated already outside the city limits.
The Ukrainian defense forces have moved on to the next steps to reduce the number of Russians who were scattered throughout the area. And now active efforts continue for their complete elimination and the stabilization of the sector. Unfortunately, Russian forces still have enough reserves to constantly send their infantry on assault operations. However, it has become much more difficult for them to carry out their plans. There have been no reinforcements seen recently.
Yet even without reinforcements, the Russians are trying to move forward. Total brutality. At the same time, commanders practically leave their subordinates with no chance of survival.
Just two numbers. Let's compare 2 months, March and April. In April, the intensity of combat operations increased by 3%. But the territorial gains of the enemy decreased by 11%. This means that the enemy is scaling up its efforts on the battlefield, suffering greater losses while capturing much less Ukrainian territory. And I think it's obvious that this trend will continue.
According to American intelligence, the counter-offensive operation of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Zaporizhia direction became Ukraine's first territorial success since 2023. And Reuters, citing its own sources, writes that Ukraine is currently slowing down the enemy's advance in all directions.
The factor of those very fortifications, about which we have heard many complaints, but unfortunately this option works and it significantly slows things down. It hinders the enemy's advance forward. And accordingly, the drone factor, those same kill zones, they have a tremendous impact on all the enemy's attempts to expand their territorial gains.
The disconnection of Starlink, especially right on the front line, helped. Russia lost the ability to use FPV drones as effectively, while Ukraine, on the contrary, increased its potential. As a result, the territorial defense forces were even able to expand the 20-kilometer kill zone along the line of contact.
Now, General Syrskyi is talking about a 30-kilometer zone, which accordingly creates even more problems for the Russians.
At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces have begun systematically targeting resources at depths of up to 160 kilometers. Enemy radars, air defense systems of short and medium range, communications, logistics hubs, and large military targets. All of this is burning by the dozens every day. And the pace of Russia's advance has dropped to its lowest in the past 2.5 years.
Now, officially, the Ukrainian armed forces are cutting off Crimea, launching drones from aerostats and attacking with missiles directly from unmanned aerial vehicles. A tactic of the Ukrainian armed forces that has stunned even the bravest. Our forces have grabbed the enemy by the throat and unleashed deadly force upon them. Putin himself is barely breathing. Right at this very moment, the unmanned systems forces are ruthlessly cutting off Russian logistics and turning what was once a powerful air defense into a distant memory. Azov has finally launched around-the-clock surveillance of the enemy. Putin's army has zero chance of escape. So, what have our forces prepared for the occupiers as dessert? Let's watch. The demilitarization of occupied Crimea is going according to plan. In the past few months, Ukraine's defense forces have delivered hundreds of effective strikes on the positions of Russian invaders on the peninsula. First, the drone operators targeted and took out radar and air defense systems. Then, starting from the spring of 26, they moved on to striking airfields, Iskanders, and other missile systems. We can state that what happened is exactly what we originally wanted. The air defense system of the peninsula suffered heavy losses from systematic drone strikes using Starlinks, after which Ukrainian drones began targeting other objectives, such as the Bastion coastal missile system and long-range MLRS. But the troubles of the occupiers are not limited to the borders of Crimea. Ukrainian drones are conquering new horizons. First, Azov took control of the roads in Mariupol. Then, the legendary course achieved success along the entire so-called land corridor to Crimea.
The defense forces of Ukraine are using the tactic of striking with the Hornet drone. The range for striking targets is up to 200 kilometers along the so-called land corridor. This is the transport logistics that, according to the Russians' plan, was supposed to connect the territory of the Russian Federation with the temporarily occupied territories: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson regions, and accordingly the occupied Crimea. The main purpose of the so-called land corridor is precisely to ensure the logistics of the occupying army.
Once a rear and safe logistical artery for the occupiers, the Taganrog-Melitopol highway, it has turned into a graveyard for fuel trucks. Vehicles are burning 100 to 150 kilometers from the front line, which is why the occupiers in Crimea and southern Ukraine have been forced onto a fuel diet.
Dear citizens, residents of Sevastopol, in the evening and morning we held emergency meetings regarding the fuel supply situation in the city. To prevent panic, just like last time, we are introducing a measure that has already proven its effectiveness. The sale of fuel at gas stations of the network will be limited to 20 liters per vehicle or per canister until the situation stabilizes. In
the matter of strikes on Crimea and the real logistics of the Russian army, Ukrainian soldiers are acting creatively. For example, the aforementioned Hornet drones are launched from aerostats. The drone travels dozens of kilometers on a balloon, which increases the UAV's strike range by 1.5 to 2 times. In addition, during attacks on the occupiers' positions in Crimea, the unmanned systems forces have begun using drones that launch missiles. The difference in the pace of development of small airspace objects is a fact. And first and foremost, the practice of their combat use is obvious, but unfortunately not for our Ministry of Defense. The armed forces of Ukraine are systematically destroying Crimea's air defense, airfields and military facilities, taking control of logistics. The longer Putin drags things out, the weaker the Russians' positions become on the peninsula, which means moving forward. More. Russia is urgently in turmoil. Putin has disappeared. The bunker isolation seems to have gotten out of control. He has abandoned his own people to their fate. The fear of being killed has prevailed. The dictator has completely lost his mind. A mysterious shadow follows him at every step. Even his doubles can no longer save him. They are also in the crosshairs. One explosion, and absolutely all the Putins will vanish into oblivion. Chilling predictions coming up next. While Russians are being told about a strong leader, the Kremlin chief himself is hiding ever deeper behind security, bunkers, and even body doubles.
We already understand exactly how it will all eventually conclude, but we will not be issuing any public statements about it at this time.
Putin, or rather the bunker dweller, has almost disappeared from Russia. His new record is 196 days. That's the pause in his regional trips. He hasn't had such a break even during COVID.
The situation in the country is getting worse and worse. Putin is becoming more and more afraid for his life. And his deep-seated sense of trust in absolutely everyone around him is just disintegrating and collapsing like a fragile soap bubble. And now, in this moment when Ukrainian drones are constantly flying overhead and everyone is meeting with Trump, his conspiratorial mindset, it is just dominating and taking complete control over his entire brain.
Since January 1st, Putin's first trip outside the Moscow region didn't happen until April. Then, amid talk of falling approval ratings, he suddenly went to St. Petersburg and visited a sports school, apparently hoping that this would help him regain the people's affection.
You've been doing gymnastics for 7 years? And how many teachers? 10. Good luck to you.
Hey there, girls. How are you doing?
Good luck to you.
Every once in a while, it becomes necessary to demonstrate to him that he still sometimes retains the appearance of a real human being, and not just a digital figure from a computer or television screen, as many people have come to believe. Therefore, he needs to portray himself as something human-like. And that is the reason why these occasional excursions pop up from time to time.
But most notably, even during the pandemic, Putin did not stay in isolation for so long. Back then, the longest pause without trips was 132 days. And in the years before the pandemic and before the full-scale invasion, the dictator could go up to 45 days without any trips. And all this is starting to look less like caution and more like genuine fear.
Of course, it is entirely possible that some secret negotiations could be taking place right now behind the ruthless dictator's back. And in fact, even with such basic knowledge of history, one must understand that there are absolutely no guarantees that everything is fine for Putin in this regard. On the contrary, with Putin, with a very high degree of probability, some complex conspiracies could actually be brewing right behind his back.
Against the backdrop of drone attacks on Russia, the Kremlin has clearly started to get nervous. And the closer the war gets to Russia itself, the more cautious the Russian dictator becomes. But what exactly is he afraid of? Is he more afraid of further Ukrainian strikes or of an internal conspiracy?
I think he is more afraid of internal plots than of Shahed drone strikes after all. Even though he rarely travels anywhere, that's precisely why he doesn't really go anywhere at all. Of course, he is more concerned about internal plots, from which he is obviously trying to protect himself, but he can never be completely certain that anyone is truly protected.
The arrests of generals, the dismissal of officials, and the constant search for traitors within the system itself. This is clearly not just a coincidence anymore.
Well, it's already a classic, really. The classic decline of a dictator when he's genuinely afraid that from every corner he'll be attacked by those who just yesterday swore eternal loyalty to him.
There was even a telling moment at the parade in Moscow. May 9th?
There were a couple of people from the Security Council, the usual Medvedev and Shoigu, Matvienko, Volodin, Mishustin. Well, maybe there were some other more minor figures, but they didn't really stand out. And none of them was sitting next to Putin. And if you look at that very reception, there was a table there, about 13 people, and there were absolutely no Russian representatives at that table except for Putin.
Well, how could you possibly do without body doubles these days? Even though the Kremlin denies their existence, they have always been there.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, hello. I am a student and I study at St. Petersburg State University. I want to ask, is it true that you have many doubles?
I thought about it and decided that there should be only one person who looks like me and speaks with my voice, and that person will be me.
On the internet, people constantly compare different videos of Putin, his face, expressions, walk, even his behavior in public. And for a long time now, people have been saying,
there is a persistent and widely discussed theory suggesting that there are at least 3 different versions of Vladimir Putin currently in operation, with various observers pointing to subtle discrepancies in his physical appearance, ear shapes, and public mannerisms as evidence that body doubles are being utilized for high-profile events and dangerous travel assignments to ensure the Russian leader's safety and continuous public presence. This has been going on for quite a while, and now it has simply reached its apex.
and if you put it all together, the isolation, the fear of traveling, the purges, and the talk about body doubles, this is no longer just the image of a reclusive leader. It's a system where the one who kept everyone in fear for years is now starting to fear everything around him. And the main change in the Kremlin today is not politics, but paranoia. An unexpected turn of events. Lukashenko, in tears, appeals to Zelensky and begs for a meeting. Is Batka ready to welcome the Ukrainian armed forces in Minsk? Moscow is lying low. Even Putin himself can't match Lukashenko's new rhetoric. Sharp political maneuvers, the world is holding its breath. Minsk is preparing to become a mediator between Kyiv and the Kremlin. The West remains skeptical. And while Batka is choking on flattering words, the trap for the dictatorship is already set. Could it be that Putin's friend will be the first to fall into it? Shocking details ahead. The cunning beetle. Lukashenko has expressed his willingness to personally meet with Volodymyr Zelensky. Moreover, according to Batka himself, at any location in Ukraine or Belarus. Please, we are open to this. Anywhere at all. Ukraine, Belarus. I am ready to meet with him and discuss the issues. Of Belarusian Ukrainian,
they are highly skilled at building strategic professional relations and possess the unique ability to engage in detailed discussions regarding potential future growth opportunities and long-term business prospects within the industry.
Lukashenko also swears that Belarus does not intend to get involved in conflicts with Ukraine, and he is ready to talk about this as well. But he immediately admits that Minsk could be drawn into military actions.
We absolutely do not threaten anyone, but we have such weapons, and we are ready to defend our homeland by all means, from Brest to Vladivostok, our compatriots, and we will do this in every possible way.
We know the vulnerable points where Drozdis is where he lives. We know all his oil refineries and airstrips, so I think he won't overplay his hand too much.
Thus, political analysts come to this conclusion. Lukashenko is trying to show Putin, the West, the US, and above all the Belarusians his own importance as
he stood as a president who was truly dedicated to the pursuit of global harmony, acting as a tireless peacemaker who sought to resolve deep-seated conflicts through patient diplomacy, strategic international cooperation, and a steadfast commitment to ensuring a more stable and peaceful world for all future generations to come. As a Russian puppet, as a person who is not independent, not a decision maker, not a policy maker, well, this is where Lukashenko wants to show off.
But no one in the West took the bait. Diplomats refused to talk to the Belarusian dictator, let alone discuss meetings with the Ukrainian president.
At first, I believed that the rapprochement with Lukashenko was an issue related to Ukraine. He was considered as a possible intermediary or as a source of information, a communication channel with Moscow.
Luka is flirting with Trump, flirting with Xi Jinping, and with Putin. Well, it's a dangerous game. Very often, those who try to sit on such a split end up being torn to pieces. Volodymyr Zelensky himself did not fall for Lukashenko's negotiations, talks, or meetings. The Ukrainian president made it quite clear to Minsk that it shouldn't play games with Kyiv, threaten with an attack, and then talk about peace. We have the capability to strengthen ourselves, and we also have the capability to act preventively regarding Russian territories. There could also be a threat to the actual leadership of Belarus, which should be lost. They should stay alert, meaning they should truly feel that there will be consequences if there are aggressive actions against Ukraine, against our people. And it is still not worth ruling them out entirely, especially against the backdrop of nuclear drills that were conducted on the territory of Belarus the day before. At that time, Lukashenko and Putin connected via video call and jointly observed the exercises. According to analysts, yes, Alexander Grigorievich is trying to prove to the Russian president his involvement in his adventures, and once again to frighten the Baltic countries. The moment of truth has finally arrived. The Black Sea is returning Russia's own gifts to it. After large-scale fires at the oil depots in Tuapse, fuel oil was carried straight to the shores of Crimea. What the Kremlin had been feeding its war machine with for years is now being washed up by the waves onto the beaches of Sevastopol, Yalta, and Alushta. The resort image is falling apart at the seams. Instead of clean sea, there are oil slicks and the smell of fuel. It seems the ecological boomerang has already come back to hit the occupiers. The first details are coming up in just a moment. There are only a few days left before the start of the holiday season in temporarily annexed Crimea. However, instead of news about preparing the beaches, residents are increasingly reporting fuel oil spills on the coast.
I'm at the beautiful Lyubimaya beach, and I'm standing here witnessing this incredibly sad scene. Yesterday, people were already collecting fuel oil here, and yet there's still a lot left.
The first reports appeared on May 7th. Already on May 9th, the Telegram channel Crimean Wind published photos of pollution on the beaches of the northern side of Sevastopol. According to satellite image monitoring, an oil pollution plume about 30 kilometers long was detected in the sea.
Here's this filth. Stains as if from a bar of tar.
In the following days, fuel oil began to be found on the beaches of Fiolent, Greater Yalta, and then on other sections of the coast, from Sudak to Sevastopol, and even in Yevpatoria.
You have to know how to admit your apologies. It is certainly true that there is fuel oil in Yalta, even if the quantities are not quite as significant as, say, in Tuapse and Liana. But the reality of the situation remains unchanged.
The Russian environmental monitoring project, Transparent World, after analyzing satellite images from May 12th and 13th, reported signs of film-like pollution on the sea surface along the southern coast of Crimea. According to experts, this pollution was observed from Alushta to Sudak and then shifted towards Feodosia and Koktebel. Environmentalists are also reporting the pollution. According to Russian environmentalist Zorik Vanosyan, in Gurzuf, volunteers were involved in cleaning up the fuel oil. Meanwhile, residents of Yalta complained about the lack of a systematic response from the authorities. I called the Ministry of Emergency Situations, wrote to the governor on social media, no response. People also reached out to me, but it seems that apart from us, no one is planning to clean this up. I was upset that nobody cared. In Sevastopol, officials claimed that no mass discharges have been recorded. According to official data, tomorrow, and during the May holidays, 12 reports of local pollution were received and specialized services collected 31 bags of contaminated soil. However, after that, the topic practically disappeared from the official agenda.
Few people see what goes on behind the scenes, how the beach looks in the spring. Mountains of microplastics that storms wash up from the sea over the winter, fuel oil on the rocks. And this is already the second season since the ship accident. Plastic trash and fuel oil. We collect it in bags and burn it. It's problematic to take all this away.
The authorities in Crimea almost never comment publicly on the pollution of the coastline, despite numerous reports from Yalta, Gurzuf, and Miskor. According to environmentalists, the fuel oil could have reached the shores of Crimea after an oil spill in the Anapa area, which was recorded on April 7th. According to satellite monitoring data, the size of the oil slick increased dozens of times over several weeks, and currents and wind gradually carried the pollution toward Crimea. Experts link the spills to the tanker Sofia, which was in the area at the time of the incident. At the same time, the authorities of Russia's Krasnodar Krai claim that the pollution was caused by a strike from Ukrainian drones on civilian vessels. The causes of the accident are still being discussed. New fuel oil discharges are being recorded along the Crimean coast. And according to eyewitnesses, it is most often local residents and volunteers themselves who are cleaning up the contaminated areas. That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hatsakalo. Even more hellish news awaits you in our next episode. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you next time.